Okay, good to see you. Thanks for being here. And I'm Jono, if I haven't met you before. And so it's great if you're a first-time visitor. Thank you for being here. If you're a first-time watcher, thank you for tuning in. And we're excited to continue our series today called The Redeemer. It's obviously our Easter series. And, so for 2,000 years, humanity in all different expressions have been celebrating, this incredible event where Jesus, he died like all people have done and will do, but he did something that no one else had done. That's why it's significant. As Brennan and Chloe alluded to, he was resurrected, which it punctuated and authenticated all the claims he made about himself. And one of the, I think, less often talked about dynamics around the Easter story is that it wasn't random, or it didn't come out of nowhere. It was predicted. In fact, there was about 600 years of Jewish scripture and literature that talked about predicted what the Messiah or the Savior would look like. So Jesus, when he arrived, he didn't just kind of turn up out of nowhere and say, I'm surprised, I'm here, my name's Jesus, follow me. He was predicted, he was prophesied, he was promised, and there was a whole string of kind of fulfillment of prophecy for someone to authenticate that they were someone special, which you contrast that. If you're a person who's maybe not a faith person or not even sure what you believe about God, this is important to note that Jesus, he stands apart from all other kind of leaders through history or people who founded belief systems or religions who would turn up and say, hey, I'm important, follow me. Jesus didn't do that. He fulfilled what was promised. It was quite extraordinary. So he didn't just self-declare. It was everything about his life that authenticated who he was. And so which made his life extraordinary, which then in the weeks and months leading up to his subsequent death, following his arrest, he predicted it. He said, listen, I fulfilled all these promises about me. He said, but you've got to know something. I'm going to die soon. But don't worry about it. 3 days later, I'm gonna rise again. Now, you would think if you were there and someone made that claim about themselves that we're gonna die, like that's enough for you to be like, hang on, warning signs, But he's like, it's gonna be okay. I will resurrect. You'd think that you'd take note of that, right? You'd think that, oh yeah, that's a big claim. I'm gonna pay attention. But when that happened, when Jesus died, the grief of all of his followers and those who had trusted in him was like, obviously, they hadn't listened or they'd forgotten. It was so palatable that they had not taken into account that Jesus predicted what would happen. Now, when Jesus at one time was talking about this, what was going to happen to him, one of his closest followers, Peter, speaks up. We read about it in Matthew's account in the Gospels. And Peter rebukes Jesus. He said, stop talking like this. And you would too, right? If your friend, someone you loved, was predicting their own death, you'd be like, would you not? Let's just stop with the death talk. And you're not going to happen. And Peter even says, I will stop it. And Jesus rebukes him. And he says something about the Christian way or the Christian path that where I want to sit on today. And we're going to leverage the imagery of what Easter talks about. But Jesus says something here that's so remarkable. And I don't like it personally. You might love it. I don't. It's difficult to wrestle with. And it's hard to get your head around. But it's where the Christian hope is wrapped up in something that we all experience, whether we are believers in Jesus or not. And he gives a pathway that the Christianity offers where it's not an avoidance of life's troubles or sufferings or hard times. And if you're looking to Jesus, if you're looking to faith as kind of a loophole around suffering or loophole around life's experiences, or to find an easier route in life, you might, but you probably, wasn't promised in Jesus, you'd find that. He did say this to Peter though. He said, listen, what you have to understand with me, if you want to be my follower, he said this term, you must take up your cross and follow me. Now this is pre Jesus being crucified to a Roman cross, which is interesting to note, but as if to say, listen, following me, you're not going to bypass or skip out on life. Christianity isn't a get out of jail card free whereby somehow all of life's horrors, you won't experience. It doesn't say that, but it does teach you how to navigate those things. And following Jesus will show you how to take up your cross. It wasn't a promise that you'd be like Jesus was nailed to a cross, but he's saying you are going to have to, whatever your cross is, whatever is your burden in life to carry, whatever sufferings you experience, what Christianity will do is teach you not how to bypass them or how to avoid them, but how to carry them. And how to navigate loss and how to navigate suffering in such a way that you would know the hope that Jesus offers, that you would know joy and peace even whilst you're doing this. And so I will never get up here and say following Jesus will make all your dreams come true or make all your problems go away. I will never promise that, but I will look at the words of Jesus and say it will teach you how to carry what you're going through in life. So what you're walking through doesn't have to crush you, it doesn't have to leave you with bitterness and despair, but you can learn how to take up your cross and carry it with a sense of confidence like Jesus did, and boldness like Jesus, and ultimately with joy like Jesus did, knowing that on the other side of it is incredible hope and a promise for our lives. This is what we're going to talk about today, how to carry our cross. So it's interesting to know that Jesus brought this up, but psychologists for years following that have been taking his lead on this and recognizing there is incredible utility and resources in the Christian faith that when applied to our own lived experiences, man, make a big difference. And so if you've studied psychology, if you're in that field, you kind of understand this. One of the kind of fathers of modern psychology is Viktor Frankl, who was a Holocaust survivor in the Second World War. And he wrote about a year after World War II ended and he was liberated from a death camp. He survived. A lot of his friends and loved ones didn't. He wrote about his experiences, and then he wrote kind of a psychological dissertation on it. And it's worth reading. The book's called Man's Search for Meaning. It's a remarkable read. I quote from it quite a bit. It's just framed a lot of my life. But he leverages the words of Jesus to make a point about how we leverage or redeem our sufferings in life. This is what he says. He goes, this is amazing, the way in which a man accepts his fate and suffering, so the kind of way you carry your cross, and that's what he says, that's literally what he says next, the way in which he takes up his cross, says it gives him ample opportunity, even under, now keep in mind, this isn't John O, who lives, in Palmwood saying this. This is Viktor Frankl, 1 year out of being liberated from a death camp. He says, even under the most difficult circumstances, so think about what he's experienced. He says, the way you take up your cross, the way you accept your fate and suffering, it can add deeper meaning to your life. Think about that truth for a moment. Now, some of you might right now be in the middle of, and indeed many of you would be, something difficult and horrendous. And I don't mean to say this flippantly or as dismissive, and certainly not with the tone of saying, listen, if you're going through something, just get over it. I would, far be it. I would never say that, and I don't want you to even hear that tone. I hope it doesn't come out of me whatsoever. But there is a punctuated truth, and I think we'd all kind of, at least with the sentiment of this, nod our heads, going, yeah, how we walk or how we take up our cross or how we handle difficult times in life, whether it's things that we're all going through as a community or your own family, your own mind, how we handle that, how we take up our cross. If we do it the right way, it doesn't have to be all loss. It can actually add meaning to our life. Like you can leverage it. This is what we mean by things being redeemed. And so the Christian promise isn't that we would bypass the cross. Easter is the story of a God who willingly went to the cross, knowing the other side was incredible hope and promise for us. And so, again, I think we can respect and understand the principle, at least the sentiment here, but there's no doubt about it. The reality is much more difficult to stomach. And I want to teach on this today. It's difficult. It's this idea of essentially having a belief around suffering. And we introduced this topic last week. So if you missed it, please feel free to go back on our YouTube or our website and have a listen. But there's something about the Easter message that shows us that God willingly chose the hard way and the difficult way. He didn't bypass it. He didn't escape it. He went to the cross. And because there's a part of it where he respects human freedom regardless of the cost. And so there's evil in the world because there's people, and there's injustice because there's people, and there's pain because there's people. And as much as I would love there to be a God who would remove all evil, but he hasn't done that. What did he do? He was nailed to the pure picture of evil in our place to redeem it, to show that even with the worst form of evil, it will never have the final say. I will do something bigger than remove evil. And in fact, many of you might be familiar with the writings of Dorothy Sayers. She was like an English author and apologist and philosopher in the 20th century. And she wrote about this very dynamic. This is great to get your head around. She says this: God didn't abolish the fact of evil. What did he do? He transformed it. In other words, he didn't stop the crucifixion, but he rose from the dead. Now, let me paint this kind of tension for us. Like, if you think about the events of your life, okay, the events of your past. Some of you might be like, well, my past actually is pretty uncomplicated, and I'm stoked to hear that. For some of you, there might be a lot of pain in your past. If there's one thing we can all agree on, you can't change your past. It's there, like you can't do anything about it. If your past is being filled with suffering or pain or even evil, you can't do anything with, like, you can't go back and change it, but you can transform what it means to you. And I ran out of illustrations and stories to use. And in fact, I'm sure your story, Shalom's story, if you heard it, trust me, it was the best story we have ever told, ever. But you can transform it. In fact, I encountered this, I remember when I was working at a school many years ago in the south of London. I was working with a guy, and he was the same age as me, and he was telling me a bit about his past. He never knew his dad growing up. His dad had never been there, and his mum died tragically when he was 18. And so that's kind of been his experience. And we were chatting. We were both in our late 20s at the time. And he was talking about his past and his life. And it's pretty hard to hear. Like, a great guy, professional man, but experienced a lot of loss in his past. And he made this statement to me. And it was confronting for me to hear because I'd never been through anything like he had been through. And he goes, I am not going to give, when I have children one day, I'm going to learn from the mistakes that were in my past, and I'm going to give my kids a different future. And when I have children, and when I have a marriage, and when I build a life, I'm determined that I'm going to make wise decisions. And no matter what the cost, no matter how hard it is, I'm going to give my children a beautiful, flourishing future. And they're going to know that there's going to be a dad who's going to be present with them, who's going to see them through all the seasons of life, no matter how difficult it gets. And I'm like, whoa, like that, again, I wouldn't have blamed him if his attitude towards his past was only anger, was only bitterness, was only resentful, and he had this like dark view of his future that things were never going to be good. What's the point of life? But it's the opposite. He was able to transform evil, right, to something that could be redeemed. Now I see him, we've kept in contact. He's got 2 beautiful boys now, and he fawns over them. He's a great father and a husband and loves them. There it is. That's like a real world example of someone who couldn't stop the evil in his past from happening, but he determined of how he's going to bear his cross. He was going to transform evil to something that would provide deep resources of hope and joy in his life, right? Again, couldn't avoid the cross, but like Jesus was resurrected from us. Do you see how that principle works? No. Okay, well, I'm going to talk for another 45 minutes until we all get this together. I mean, we see that's a picture of the cross, right? Something that was a picture of Roman authority, Roman torture, Roman evil. In fact, if you walked into any town that was occupied by Roman forces, crosses would be the first thing you saw because of the way of saying, if you break Roman rule and Roman law, this is what's going to happen, right? It was a form of intimidation. Jesus redeemed it, and now when you see the cross, it equals the love of God, it equals redemption for sinners, it equals new life, right? So it's this whole picture of redeeming evil. And there's a story that was recorded in the New Testament by only one of our gospel writers named Luke. Luke was a doctor, and he gave kind of an orderly account of things that they transpired around the life of Jesus. And right at the end of his account, and I think it's the 24th chapter, he writes about 2 men. Jesus had been dead for a couple of days, and they were followers of Jesus. They had hoped in Jesus. He was dead. There'd been rumors of that he was alive again, but who would believe that? They were like, come on. And so they were low, they were feeling depressed and heartbroken that the one that pinned all their hopes on was now dead. And we pick up the story where Jesus hears their conversation, and Jesus, unbeknownst to them at the time, they didn't realize it was Jesus, the resurrected Jesus, comes along and joins in their conversation as they were walking from Jerusalem. Let's pick it up. This is in Luke's gospel. It says, as they talked and discussed these things, these are the 2 men, Jesus himself came up and walked along with them, but they were kept from recognizing him. We don't know why or how that happened. Just Luke records the details as they took place. At this point, they didn't realize it was Jesus. So Jesus asked them, well, what are you discussing together as you walk along? Notice this, they stood still and their faces were downcast. I want to pause there for a moment because I'm conscious that with how we talk about life and how we talk about the events that transpire in our own life or the events certainly around the world, how often can this be our demeanor? That it stops any forward momentum of our life. We are just still, and this is our outlook, downcast. And Jesus comes to 2 men. Unbeknownst to them, the most remarkable thing had taken place, but that's not where their conversation was. They were stuck and they were looking down. And no doubt about it, when you engage with Jesus, Two things he's going to do. He's going to cause your life to keep moving forward. God never wants your life to remain stuck in where you are. Are you stuck? Have you found yourself talking about the same problem over and over and over again? Have you found an event from your past, it still dictates the temperament and the outlook of your life? Have you found yourself being offended or bitter or hurt by something that you can't change? But now this is where you're at. You're stuck in it now. Has a relationship got stuck somewhere? Has an outlook got stuck somewhere? And again, I'm not trying to diminish that, but here we see these two guys. I think we can relate to it. Something tragic might have taken place and we find ourselves not moving. And instead of having an outlook that looks forward and up and hopeful with a redemptive view of the world, we're downcast. And to this environment, Jesus will always walk alongside us. He doesn't intrude. He doesn't force his way in. He comes alongside us like, well, what are you talking about? I love that kind of, that way that God operates through the person of Jesus. They stood still, their faces downcast. Goes on. So one of them named Cleopas, I think that's how you pronounce it. He says, are you the only one visiting Jerusalem who doesn't know the things that have happened? What things he's talking about? The cross, crucifixion of Jesus, the trial. A week earlier, he rode in on a donkey to Jerusalem, palm trees everywhere, people hailing him as a returning king. And those same people then go crucify him, and he's 7 days later, like, where have you been? How have you missed this? Jesus' reply was, I love this. He said, what things? Now he knew, but just pause for a moment from Jesus' perspective and compare it with your own. We can view things through one lens, all the things that have taken place, to which Jesus often replies, what things? Just to say, I know they seem insurmountable for you, but for me, what things? Those things, they're nothing. Yeah, but this, what things? From death to life is where Jesus works. So they're like, well, the things about Jesus. He was a prophet. He was powerful in word and deed before God and all the people. We go on. The chief priests and our rulers handed him over to be sentenced to death, and they crucified him. He says, but we had hoped, and this is where I want to land today, we had hoped that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel. Now, I want to unpack this sentence for a bit, and it's going to be helpful for us, I hope. The word redeem here, when we talk about redeeming Israel, it's the same, the root word, the Greek that was used here is the same word that we get rescue from. It's actually the meaning of the word redeem here. I know we don't often use redeem all the time, but I think we have a picture of the word rescue, this idea that someone would be in bondage or imprisoned or trapped or in slavery, and it's like a picture of them being plucked out of slavery. And to be honest, this was the perfect picture of Israel at the time. They're like, we're hoping that Jesus was going to be the guy that would redeem us because we're in bondage under Roman occupation. The Roman Empire was at its height during this time. And so they'd pinned all their hopes that Jesus somehow was going to be this either incredible political leader that was going to deliver them. He was like, I'm not a political leader, and deliverance won't come through politics. And they're like, oh, well, we're hoping he's going to be some amazing like military leader. But Jesus is like, no, the redemption you're looking for isn't going to come through taking up of arms. That's not what you're really looking for. But that's where they'd kind of pin their hope here. But what Jesus was doing, and they didn't realize at the time, through his resurrection, it was way bigger than just Israel. And it was way bigger than them just being delivered from an occupying military force. What Jesus was doing was to deliver them from the consequence and the power of sin and death in the world. And it wasn't just for Israel, it was for the whole world. And they had no, at this point, of course, if we were in their shoes, we'd be like, predict it all you want, Jesus. None of that makes sense to us at this time, right? All they knew is here's this guy that is amazing, and we're hoping all these promises and prophecies that Israel's going to be delivered, but yet Jesus was doing something so much bigger. And here's the point I want us to understand. I think what Jesus and what Easter shows us about what God is like is how God redeems us, how God redeems us is often so much broader than what we're expecting. Think of that it's broader, and we can often view God. And if you're a praying person here, perhaps you're someone that's never prayed to God ever in your life, you wouldn't even know how to do that, but you're like, okay, I'm confronted with something painful and difficult right now. God, would you remove this? Would you somehow remove this from me? But often, what God is up to is bigger than we can even perceive in the moment, and it's broader. Here they were hoping that Rome would simply be, would be removed and then be delivered from Rome. But what Jesus was doing was so much bigger than Rome, right? They were hoping to be redeemed from Rome, but God was planning their redemption. This is big. God was planning their redemption in spite of Rome. That irrespective of Rome, whether they're in power or not, whether the Caesar's on the throne or not, the way I want to redeem you, Rome can do what it wants, what I am offering, and the hope and redemption that I am offering your life through my death and resurrection. I don't mind what's going on in your world. Be it as it may, my redemption is bigger than the events that are happening to your life. And this is how God redeems things in our life. Now, I'm challenged by this thought because, again, if we put ourselves in the life of this story, it's like, well, God, that's nice. Like the sentiment's nice. Can you just remove Rome still? They're very annoying. They're killing our men and women and children. Remove them. But God's redemption is often bigger and much broader than often what we could be anticipating or maybe what we're expecting. And indeed, this is what happened. We know this is exactly what God was up to because Christianity grew in the Roman Empire in spite of the Roman Empire. With all their crosses, with all their armies, with all their Roman law and tyranny and terror, Christianity flourished. And in one generation, from the backwater of the empire, Christianity had spread everywhere. And within barely 3 centuries, think of this, it had become the official state religion of the empire. And it is now still standing even after the empire has long fallen away. God was able to bring his message and his hope and his redemption in spite of the external problems and pressure they were experiencing. I mean, if you go to Rome now even, you can still see it. There's like a clash. You can witness it. If you've ever visited Rome, you've got all these beautiful ruins, you know. Glad they're ruined now because at the time, I'm sure no one said, this is beautiful, you know. But you got all the ruins of the might of the Roman Empire, but everywhere you look now, there's like, there's 3 things that I was confronted by first time I went to Rome. One was the Colosseum. I remember seeing it the first time. The second, there were crosses everywhere. Crosses everywhere now. Like the city is dominated by cathedrals and churches and crosses and chapels. Like it is everywhere. And the third thing is coffee. Right, so I was 19 when I first went there. I was with one of my older brothers, David. And now, and in fact, no, you can judge me because I'm judging me when I'm saying this next story. Like, turn the coffee snobbery up for a moment. This is in 2003, right? The only decent coffee store we had I misspoke. The only chain coffee store we had on the Suncoast Coast was Starbucks. Look how good that's going down at Mooloolaba now. It's not there. We went for a walk the other day and go, something used to be here. Oh yeah, that coffee shop or something. Anyway, so it was early era. It was an early stage of my coffee journey. And so my brother and I, was early morning, we arrived in Rome, we flew in, and so we're like, we need to go get coffee. And at that stage in my coffee journey, it was mockers for me. Why are they called mockers? Because they make a mockery of all good things I just made that up. Anyone still on mockers now? Be brave to admit it. Anyone? No one, yeah, my big brother is. But anyways, there's only 2, I'll let you pick which one. So I get to the cafe and there's like some cool Italian dude there, and I'm gonna put an Italian accent because I'm Italian, so I'm gonna give it a shot. But yeah, I know. Hang on to something. So we go there and I'm like, I need a coffee. So I said to the guy, you know, good morning. I think I actually went, buongiorno, and he looked at me weirdly. I'm like, sorry, g'day. And he's like, can I order a mochaccino, please? And he's like, I make an espresso. And I was like, no. I haven't even graduated to flat whites yet. I hadn't even heard of flat whites at that stage, right? So I was like, no, like, you know, mochaccino, you know, like, yeah, espresso, but, you know, with some milk and chocolate in there, just, and he goes, no, I make you espresso. I'm like, no, like, how do I explain this in Aussie? So, hot milk, you know, latte, what do you guys say? And sprinkles, and I tried to explain it. He goes, you sit down and shut up, I make you espresso. So I had my first espresso with 7 teaspoons of sugar in it. So it was delicious, you know. So you go to Rome, right, and you're confronted by coffee, by the Colosseum, and by crosses, right? The crosses. Now, furthermore, to me, this is fat. As someone if you're a reader of history, I think this is remarkable. And so I often ask the question, why did Jesus arrive at that point in history? Have you ever asked that, ever wondered that? And if you're somebody who's curious about like the legitimacy of the Christian message and the historical accuracy of Jesus, like often the question comes up, well, why there? I understand in geography, he had to go to Israel and all the things of prophecy and prediction, all that stuff. But why then? Out of all the times in history, like why did God choose that point? Now, I don't know whether it's the reason. I can't interpret God's mind on this matter. But we can look at the facts surrounding it. And one of them is the area when Jesus arrived was during what they referred to in the Roman Empire in history as the Pax Romana. The Pax Romana, which is a Latin term which means the Roman peace. So it was about a 200-year period there where thanks to Rome's might and kind of the security around the edges of the empire, there was general peace. As long as you didn't break Roman law, it was peaceful, And this is one of the reasons why the different Roman emperors during this 2-century period often tried to promote themselves as a living god because, well, look at all the peace we've brought to the empire. Now, there's several reasons why they referred to the empire as generally peaceful. Not only were their borders strongly secured, so there was barely any. So outside of those borders, lots of fight, but inside it was pretty safe. You had, for the first time in history, the whole empire was connected via roads, right? You've heard of the Roman roads, all roads lead to Rome. And so travel was easier than it had ever been, accessible, safe, like you could generally do it. And there was law now, so you weren't just bandits everywhere. You're going to suffer consequences. So it was safe to travel. The Mediterranean, there was the shipping, the transport through boats and the like was much more accessible. And possibly the biggest one is there was one language at this point. And thanks to the Hellenization following the Greeks is Greek with this spoken language throughout the whole empire. And this is important to note because if its major language at the time wasn't Greek and it was Hebrew, well, good luck trying to spread the message of Jesus to a world where no one outside of your nation spoke your language. But at this point, the whole empire was not only geographically connected through roads, through transport, through security, but also language. It seems to be this perfect point in history for God to decide to enter as early as possible on the pages of history. And at that point, then the message spread throughout Europe, throughout Asia Minor, throughout North Africa. It was remarkable to witness. So in some way, it's like God's leveraged and redeemed all the horrors of Rome. It's like, how can I leverage this evil empire to get my message of hope to more people? And on the back of Roman law, of Roman transport, of Roman infrastructure, God's like, I'll use that. He redeemed something that could have only been seen as evil as something to get a message of hope. Now, that might be preacher's license, but that's how I view it. Now, Paul, who was one of our first leaders of the Christian church in the first century, he wrote about 2/2 of our gospel, of our New Testament. He leveraged himself. He was a Roman citizen. He leveraged his citizenship. He leveraged Roman law and even leveraged Roman transport and custom to gain entry for the purpose of the message of Jesus to Rome itself. Now, as much as it was easy for the Christian message to travel in the empire, it wasn't easy to be a Christian. And within that empire, Paul made it his heart. He wanted to travel to Rome because he found out eventually, even in the midst of all the tyranny that Christians would experience under Roman persecution against Christians in the first few centuries, Paul wanted to get to Rome because he heard there were Christians in Rome, the city itself. So, anticipating his arrival, he wrote a letter to them. And we're going to pick up this part of the letter where he specifically deals with this idea of suffering, because no doubt about it, to be a Jesus follower in the first century, it flew in the face. And we talk about this regularly here because I think it's a good image for the world and the tensions we can often experience now. But you could believe whatever you want as long as you honored Caesar as Lord. And Christians were like, no way. There's only one Lord and his name is Jesus. And so that would bring, as you can imagine, Christians into conflict with the Roman authorities. And so Paul writes this letter to Christians who, remember, in Rome. Now, there's probably no coffee yet. I don't know, maybe it came from Northern Africa. Maybe some of the rich guys would have had it, but there's certainly crosses were not a religious symbol at this time. Crosses were still very much, in fact, for Christians in Rome, they'd been very familiar with seeing crosses everywhere. And so Paul writes to those people living in that environment words that I think we can apply, take to heart, maybe help us in what you're walking through right now. He's put it this way. He says, listen, I consider, this is in Romans chapter 8, I consider that our present sufferings are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed in us. Now, that word glory, again, how do we get our head around what he was trying to say there? It's a Greek word, and I actually love the meaning of it. I'm going to read it so I remember it. The Greek word for glory here literally means the awesome light. This is the definition. The awesome light that radiates from God's presence. I don't even know what that means. But this is what Paul was convinced of. He's like, when you consider what you're going through, he goes, and you want to put on one hand your sufferings over here. He goes, when I compare it to the awesome light that radiates from God's presence in our life, they're not even worth comparing. Like, they are completely outweighed of one another. Now again, remember who he's writing to: Christians who lived in Rome under the tyranny of the Roman Empire. So this wasn't like, I don't know, insert maybe our own a first world form of pain here. And that's not even to discount it, but I'm just trying to show the weightiness of why you use this term. He says, I consider that what we're experiencing right now, maybe where we're suffering, this is nothing compared to what God is able to do in our lives. And in fact, the opposite, he says, to compare it to this idea that in us, notice this, where the glory will be. It's going to be in us, that God is going to do something inside of your life that the best way to explain it, it's like glory. That when people look at the external parts of you, they're like, man, they're suffering. But why is it that something else is radiating from their life? He's like, this is the idea that in you, when you trust in God, when you trust in the God who redeemed the cross and was resurrected and squeezed the good out of evil, because when you trust in that God, well, there's going to be something in you. And the best word Paul could find to explain it was glory. Something was going to radiate from your life that doesn't compare with what you're experiencing. Now, this is hard to get our heads around because, again, it's nice sentiment. I'm not trying to preach this and be emotional about this. I'm trying to look at, this is like the first Christians, what they were convinced of when they saw Jesus resurrected. This is what they were totally convinced of. Several years ago, Chloe and I, we had the opportunity to meet with a bunch of Christians in Egypt, and it was an incredible experience. And they took us to meet some other Christians who lived on the outskirts of Cairo in a place called Garbage City. And if you've been around, I've shared this story a number of times, but essentially, if you, comparatively, Egypt is a pretty okay place to welcome Christian refugees compared to a lot of the other nations around that part of the world. So they'll welcome you in, but essentially they try to put all the Christians into this one area called Garbage City. It's called Garbage City because it's a garbage tip. So we get driven there, and as we drive through, it is confronting. I'd use the term suffering, to see children on the dirty streets and all these people, and they're there because of their faith in Jesus. Not because they're criminals, not because they're evil people, not because they're rude or racists. They're there because they worship Jesus. And I see this, and then a guy meets us there. He would have been maybe 4 or 5 years older than me. And the smile on his face outshone the horror I was witnessing all around. And he's like, let me show you our church. I'm like, okay. And they'd cut their church out of a rock. I don't know if you might have visited it before if you've been there. So it's completely outdoors, and it's a big kind of cave in the side of the rock. That's where they do church. And I'm like, is the aircon working today on the Sunshine Coast? And just to see this guy talk about his life and faith, and I'm waiting. I wanted to give the guy a hug and be like, can I pray? Can I pray for you? By the end, I'm like, can you pray for me? Because the only way I can explain this, something was happening in him. I'm seeing everything that was happening to him, the sufferings. But like the words of Paul, he goes, when we consider the enormity of what Easter means, we compare them. We can't even compare with what God is able to do in us. And I saw this guy with this, again, this idea of this radiant joy and confidence and courage. Look, I'm sharing this story with you like 8, 9 years later as if it happened yesterday, because that's the impact of it. I was like, this is legit. You found something in faith in Jesus that causes you, there's like light, there's this glory radiating from you. Now, let's pause for a moment, okay? Who wants to be like that? Now, again, we would love to avoid suffering at all costs, but Christianity doesn't promise that. It does promise, though, that God would redeem your sufferings. A God who went to the cross, but then was resurrected. So whilst you might not be able to avoid all suffering, hear me, What is promised through faith in Jesus, that you would know something that is bigger than your suffering, right? Something that outshines the darkness of the suffering that you could experience, that would cause you to confront your suffering with courage and hope and vision. That instead of like the two men who Jesus was talking with, whose faces were downcast and they were still and paused and not moving forward, that you can rather have a face that looks up, full of glory and hope and wonder, that in spite of what I'm walking through, I worship a Jesus. And I worship a God who's able to make glory even come from the worst in my life. And Paul goes on and writes several more verses kind of punctuating this point, but it culminates in a verse that has been so widely quoted, probably more tattooed than any other verse in the Bible on people's biceps. It's one we probably, many of you know all too well. You might not even be a Christian or someone who's read the Bible, but you've likely heard this. And Paul concludes this passage in verse 28 by saying, listen, and we know that in how many things? All things. God works. That confronts me because I look for God working in the good things all the time. That's obviously a sign that God's for me because things are going good and I've been healed and I've got the job and she said yes, he said yes. And again, he does that, but he's not limited to just the good things. God works in all things. Paul's like, hey, Christians, you guys that are suffering, there's something we all know. Irrespective of what we're experiencing, God works in all of it. And what is he doing? He's working for the good of those who love him and who have been called according to his purpose. This is why I think every single person should be a Christian. This is why I think every single person should become a follower of Jesus. Because when you follow Jesus, it's not as if everything in your life that happens to you changes. What it does mean is that you invite God Almighty into your life, and he's able to leverage and redeem all things and make it work for your good. And we can often misread this, and I certainly have. I've certainly, I think, preached this wrong before. We're thinking God is, the different translations have made it difficult, but this idea that somehow God is going to change all the things, so it's good for me. It doesn't say that. It says in all things, God works for the good of, not the things, but of the those. Yeah. God is always working for your good. God is working for our good. He's always working for your good. And again, that's a hard thing, right? That's a trust thing. That's a faith thing that somehow in my life, irrespective of what I'm experiencing, God is working. And I share that with you to encourage you to this end. Practice this. Remember this. And next time you're confronting something that's painful and difficult, just pause for a moment to think, okay, I don't want to draw the conclusion too quickly that God somehow abandoned me and forsaken me, because he won't. Pause and practice and remember for a moment that maybe, well, hang on. If the promise is that in all things God's working, where is he here? Here's what I know. I don't know many things, but I'm sure of this. The more you practice that, of learning to recognize God working in all things, it'll change how you see all things that you're going through. It'll change how you speak about all the things you're going through. And you won't be like these two guys that Jesus came along where you'll just be stuck and looking downcast. You'll have some form of forward momentum in your life, and your head will be lifted in your life. And you realize that somehow God is doing something broader and bigger than maybe I think he's doing. And whilst I wait for the suffering to pass, and whilst I wait for my redemption to happen, and whilst I wait for things to change, you know what's changing? Me. And where's God's glory radiating? In me. And you know, this is tough at the moment, but God is working here. So I'm gonna make sure that I'm not gonna let the thing that's happening to me become a thing that is happening in me. I'm gonna let what God has done be the thing that is happening in me, and to completely change my outlook. I don't want it to change how I confess to my family, my loved ones. I don't want to have this like bad energy radiating from me when I walk into work every day. I want to be the guy that walks in that has this glory radiating from my life. People are like, what is it? I know what's going on in your life. Yeah, but there's something else. I trust Jesus. And Paul said, we're convinced that the suffering we go through is nothing compared to the glory that we would experience. So practice this, remember this. And so it's Jesus walking along with these two men, and they're like, we were hoping that he was going to be the one that would redeem Israel from Roman occupation. What Jesus says next, again, just lands this perfectly, but hopefully clarifies this for us, at least how God works. Jesus said, look at how foolish you are, how slow to believe. Man, he called me out on that. I am so slow to believe all the time. I'm quick to react, and I'm quick to blow up, and I'm quick to get angry. Why are we slow to believe, right? Don't be slow anymore. Be quick. It says, how slow to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Next verse. So this is Jesus. Did not the Messiah, speaking of himself, didn't he have to suffer these things and then, and here's that word again, enter his glory? Did not the Messiah have to suffer? Death always precedes resurrection. And Jesus always sees everything in our life from the perspective of the resurrection, from his redemption, which to me gives me great hope, because it says, irrespective of our suffering and our pain and our trial, in Christ, nothing is ever wasted. Nothing. He's able to even take the bad and bring something good out of it. He's able to take a trial or your past, maybe things you've carried in life that you look back and go, that was horrible, that was unjust, that was abuse. In Christ, he's able to take even the worst and say nothing will be wasted. We often deal with things one-dimensionally, but Christ is always relating to things in view of the resurrection. He is always working in things. He's a God who takes a Roman cross, a symbol of torture, of hate, of tyranny and abuse, and turn it into an image of grace and love and acceptance and of heaven. So I therefore conclude that Christ isn't simply honored when we win. He is, but not just when we win. And Christ just isn't honored when things go well. He is, but not just when it goes well. What Christianity teaches is that the glory of God isn't restricted to just when things go well. Glory can come from anything. So when they're like, haven't you heard about all the things that have been going on in Jerusalem? And Jesus is like, what thing? What things? Because I'm able to do anything with whatever you're walking through. And I know that, I don't want that to sound like it's hyperbole. That's why I'm not trying to throw my arms around there and yell this at you. I want to wrestle with, what does Jesus mean for us in our lives and what we're experiencing right now? He loves you. God is for you. And my hope and prayer is that as you continue to follow Jesus, like eventually happened with these two men talking with Jesus, their heads were lifted, they got unstuck, and their life began to move forward. And they recognized that God was right here working in all of it, even though they didn't see it at the time. And I want to believe that for your life. And if this, I know for many of you in your journey, this is maybe a reminder for you, and it's this is good, I know that. But for some of you, this could be I got more questions about this, how my experience has taught me something different. One of the things we try and help with is we do different kinds of short courses, and we have small groups throughout the course of our weeks and the year. There's one coming up next month called Alpha, and we do this throughout the different courses of our church. But it's for people, if you're exploring faith or you're struggling with faith and you've got real questions about things, this is a great course for you to do. It's free. We'll be doing it online for those who want it, or in person if you need it. But I'll finish with the story about it, because this is it's an amazing course that helps people understand who Jesus is. And it's been going all around the world. When COVID hit 2 years ago, I remember hearing from the founder of Alpha and the core team in England. They were panicking. Right? The purpose of this story, they were panicking that Alpha would fall apart, because the way Alpha would usually historically work is you sit with people, you have meals together face to face, and then the end of the course you go away for a whole half day together and have an amazing time. That's the whole heart behind it. So the idea now that everything had to be online and on Teams or Zoom or Skype, they're this whole thing's going to fall apart. But two things have happened that they didn't expect through COVID with the Alpha course, and millions of people have done it all over the world. Millions. Number one, they had a bigger uptake of people across the planet doing Alpha than ever before, ever. And there was an article in I remember reading the article they printed at the time in Britain that when COVID first hit, 1 in 4, what's that, 25% of internet searches at the time were questions about faith and about God and about hope and all those things, right? And so there's a need, and so more people took it up. And secondly, more people completed the course than ever before. So something they thought was going to be like, it's going to destroy us. Somehow God leveraged it for good. And now more people have been able to engage with the message of Jesus than ever before. I share that story, number one, because it gives you a chance to sign up when it comes up later in the year, but to show who knows how God can be working in all things. So I'd love to pray for you and whatever you're carrying in your life. Heavenly Father, I'm so grateful that you went to the cross through your son, Jesus, took on our sin and our mistakes and our burdens, delivered us and set us free. And we're resurrected so we could know that kind of life too. I'm praying that for every person here this morning who's listening in, whatever it is that they're experiencing or navigating, may they know the glory of God in their life. May they know courage and hope, and may they know you working in all things, I pray, in the name of Jesus. Amen. Well, God bless you. Thanks so much for being here today. Hey, we got baptisms coming up over the next few weeks. So if you're interested in baptism, please see one of our team. If you're new here, we'd love to meet you after the service. Have a wonderful week. Thanks for stopping by.